about this one first. Continuation of last time, the AI cars that couldn't drive themselves by Driver61.
November 2024, Abu Dhabi. 11 cars head out onto the Yas Marina circuit for one of the most unusual races ever. The event has been massively hyped, but things didn't go to plan. The cars didn't look that fast, the racing lines weren't very good, and there were crashes. It almost looked like nobody was driving the cars, and that's because there wasn't. This was the first A2RL race, where cars that are programmed by engineers drive themselves. Now, whether or not you think a human should be behind the wheel of a racing car or not, the engineering and technology behind these machines is actually fascinating. And that's what this is really about. Not replacing drivers, but pushing the limits of engineering. A few weeks ago, I went to watch them test, a month before the upcoming race. And, to be honest, the cars look fast.
Genuinely, I didn't expect them to be as quick as they are. Now, of course, they are not as quick as a racing driver, at the moment at least. But when they're coming down the straight here, they are flat out. And on the brakes, as Team Tom said, they are really late. I don't think they're far off the limit of what the car can actually do.
But there's one challenge that's proving much harder to solve than anyone expected. And it's the same thing that separates great drivers from average ones. But before we get into that, let's understand how these things actually work and why the engineering is so impressive. So what exactly are we looking at here? Well, this is Josh Rolls, the head of operations at A2RL, and he's going to walk me through the car.
So here we have a Super Formula 23 specification autonomous racing car from Dallara. So this is traditionally raced in Super Formula in Japan, which is a Japanese racing league, and we take the car from Dallara and we convert it into an autonomous racing machine.
The A2RL cars produce 550 horsepower from a 2-litre turbocharged Honda engine. They weigh just 680.
You know, my first thought with all this is like gaming, like a lot of racing game. I mean, I know it's not exactly the same, but for like I'm guessing what they don't struggle too much is like getting the car to stay on the track or something. Like that part is probably fine, you know, we've got literal cars driving on real roads already, following the road, but it's probably like having an AI system that understands racing, when to brake, to turn, how to pass people. So like, I wonder how much they look into like actual video games, and the AI is there to, well, it's a different type of AI, obviously, I understand that, but I feel like it could probably help a lot, yeah.
Kilograms and run on slicks with carbon ceramic brakes and lots of aerodynamics. Super Formula cars are only about 8 or 9 seconds off of Formula 1 time at Suzuka, and they're actually faster than F2 cars. So this is a proper racing car, and it's an interesting platform to choose.
It's probably one of the fastest things outside of Formula 1 in its standard configuration. Now, we could have obviously gone for a Formula E car, or we could have even gone for a GT car. But we wanted to incorporate pure motorsport with a high-class single-seater racing car into autonomous vehicle racing. So that's why we picked this platform. It's highly capable and it allows us to progress with performance and autonomy here at the racetrack up until the car's capability.
So to convert this car from a human-driven race car into an autonomous one, they had to strip out everything a driver would use and replace it with an entirely different system.
We have things like brake IR temperatures, we have tyre surface temperatures, we have in-wheel tyre pressures and tyre temperatures, we have pitot tubes on top, we have all the traditional sensors and data that you would get in a normal racing car, and then we add our own autonomous racing stack inside. So what you can see here is we basically remove all of the requirements for a human driver, such as seat, steering wheel, pedal box, steering column, and we replace it with a highly technical autonomous racing stack.
The autonomous stack is built around a custom PC that fuses and processes all of the data the car collects. Then there are the actuators, the steering motor, hydraulic brake actuators, and drive-by-wire throttle control. But the really impressive bit is what sits on top. But before we get into that, I need to tell you about
sensors. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I wonder if it's like 4 cameras or if it's like a 360 camera. I mean, actually, it doesn't need a camera, I'm stupid. I mean, they probably need a camera for like the broadcast, but they need sensors, yeah, not a camera.
Today's sponsor, Incogni, just not to wait. Someone else profits from your data. Now, back to the video.
We have what we call the perception ring that you can see on top, which is effectively the car's eyes and ears. The perception ring is made up of 3 radars, 3 lidars, 7 cameras. There's 6 on the perception ring here and 1 that faces out the rearwards. With that, we have full 360-degree coverage. This car can think and see 360 degrees at any one time. So with a human, when you're looking, passing someone on your left, this car can do left, right, front, back, all at the same time.
The car also has GPS antennas and 5 and 4G cellular systems, and all of that generates an insane amount of data. 150 gigabytes per lap at Yas Marina. So when they're running 40 or 50 laps in a testing session, that's terabytes of data. The LiDARs alone are scanning the environment with 200,000 points per second, and the 7 cameras are all streaming 4K footage in real time, which all gets processed by that central PC.
Every team here codes their car differently, and that's the challenge of what we're doing. We give them a platform. They all have the same sensor setup. They all even have the same car setup, so same fuel levels, same cambers, toes, casters, wing levels, etc. They're competing on a software basis. Now, how they take all of the data that this car generates and fuses and drives the car is completely up to them.
So the entire competition comes down to who can write the best code, who can take all of that sensor data, process it fast enough, and make the car go quickly. And for me, that's where the real challenge begins. So how do they actually make these cars fast? Well, the first challenge is just getting them around the track, and that's harder than it sounds. Now, just bear in mind that when I went to Abu Dhabi, I was watching the cars test about a month before they race. So the teams were actually being a bit careful because qualifying was in a week's time, and they didn't want to crash and lose the car. But I was still genuinely impressed with the speed, especially if you watch any of the footage from last year. You'll see some of the cars were struggling. They didn't seem to know exactly where they were on track. But why was that?
The GPS here at Yas Marina is very interesting because we have the W Hotel, which is a big concrete structure that the cars actually have to drive under. So last year teams were relying a bit more on GPS. It was the first time here, so they were understanding that actually GPS here is very difficult to manage.
So losing GPS is like...
I mean, as I said, like, do you even need a GPS? Like, this is a pretty small track in a sense. Wouldn't it be like less processing and data and all that if you just make a custom I mean, I don't know how it works obviously, but like a custom version of the map only or something? I mean, I don't know what I'm saying, but I'm saying something.
Driving with your eyes closed for about 5 seconds on the motorway, not good. And that's where this year's teams are different. They've got redundancy. They use multiple sensors to understand where the car is, so there should be less driving blind. And to understand even more, I spoke to Simon Sagmeister, team principal of TUM Autonomous Motorsport, the team that won in 2024.
To be able to have a car go out autonomously on this racetrack on the Yas Marina circuit, you really have to master a lot of different challenges before you can even complete the first lap. So just localizing yourself, for example, if you exit through the tunnel here, is a big challenge since you don't have GPS coverage and in all the positions of the track. You really need to build robust algorithms that allow you to localize yourself so that the car knows where it is on the racetrack. And this is always the first step.
And it's not just about knowing roughly where you are. You need centimetre level accuracy at high speed. So if GPS isn't bulletproof, what do the teams do?
So what we usually do is we drive one lap really slowly, so even sometimes even manually, so we just control it via joystick and collect data. With this data from the sensors, especially the LiDAR sensors, we build a 3D representation of the environment and of the racetrack.
That's what I was thinking.
And if we run fast, we compare online what is the LiDAR currently seeing with the map, and therefore we can get a position where the car is. And we usually also use the information where we were. So for example, if we were in turn 3 2 seconds ago, we usually know that it's not physical to be now in turn 6, so we have a limited area where we look around us in the map, and therefore we can pretty accurately determine where we are at the moment.
Right, so now we know they're creating a map with LiDAR and using GPS where they can. But what else are they using to understand where the car is and what it's doing? Well, there's the IMU, an accelerometer that measures the car's acceleration and rotation. And then there's also something called an optical velocity sensor.
It scans the ground and compares 2 consecutive images, and therefore this determines how much did it move in the longitudinal direction, so forward, and how much did it move to the side. And if you know the time between 2 camera images, you know essentially the velocity that you're traveling with. And by comparing the movement to the side of the car to the movement in front or in the longitudinal direction, you can determine pretty accurately how the car is oriented in comparison to the direction where it's moving in. So you can see if the car is sliding.
And that's really important. Being able to detect sliding means they can understand when the car is at the limit of grip, which is information a human driver would feel through the steering wheel and seat. So now the car knows where it is, but knowing where you're going is one thing. Going fast is another. Getting to the limit is, of course, a big challenge. And while teams like TUM are more or less there, they are quick, not all of the cars are at that level yet.
So teams here are getting better and better every lap that they run, and they're understanding the car from a motorsport perspective. You have to understand that teams that are here are typically from universities or institutions who are developing robotics. Not that many of them have motorsport and racing backgrounds.
So what do the top teams like TUM actually do to find the limit?
The first step always is we have some kind of vehicle model and simulation that we...
It's funny because recently I was rewatching a documentary about Deep Blue, which was in the 90s and 80s. There was a university team of students who were trying to make a chess computer that could beat Grandmaster, and the main programmer guy didn't even know how to play chess much, and yet he was the one who made most of it happen. So I guess it's kind of the same thing here. You know, most of them are like more into the programming side of things than the sports side of things. They probably don't know too much about the racing, and yet they have to try to make it work in both ways, basically.
We have never driven the car created from experience, or we get some initial data where we can fit our simulation model on, and we use this simulation to determine, okay, how fast do we think the car can go acceleration wise, so we estimate how much braking can the car do, how strongly does it accelerate, and especially how fast can we go into the turns.
So it's actually a similar process to how a human driver would approach it, predicting the grip levels, then going out to test those predictions.
We usually start slowly to just minimize the risk, and then we gradually increase the performance that we want to see from the car. By constantly monitoring the telemetry and all the internal reports that different modules of our software are giving us in real time, we can judge if everything is fine and if it's safe to increase the performance.
Now, this is where it gets difficult. When they're approaching the limits of grip, there are hundreds of signals to monitor in real time. Slip angles, brake temperatures, lateral g-forces, and only 5 or 6 people watching all of that data, trying to decide if it's safe to push harder.
Wouldn't you use an AI for that then? I mean, use an AI to control the other AI, you know?
And this is why we created an algorithm for that helps us monitoring all the important information about the car and determines in real time on the car itself if it's safe to go even faster at the moment. So we essentially have different thresholds for different signals that we see. So for example, in high-speed turns, we usually don't want to exceed a certain slip angle at the front wheels. And if this threshold is below if this threshold is met, we can safely increase performance. And by having multiple thresholds on multiple signals, we can then learn on if it's safe to progress. And an important factor in this as well is that a racetrack usually is not very equal around in every corner. So we have different asphalt, different conditions with dirt on the track at different corners. And this is why we usually condense this information into a map as well, where we say, okay, in this turn it's safe to go this fast.
So the algorithm is basically saying, last lap, turn 5, the braking was perfect. Let's go harder this lap. They're exploring the limit by incrementally pushing until they find it.
We usually talk about it, we're exploring the limit, so if it's all fine, we go faster until it's not fine anymore. We at the moment incrementally increase the pace just to find where the limit is. We do not have an algorithm yet that brakes earlier to give you enough headroom than going into the turn. But we found this out to be quite robust as well, because we can, and with an algorithm, be a lot more repeatable and precise than a human can be. And therefore it's also safe if we approach the limit 2% by 2% by 2%. It's usually not as far over so that you can't react to it anymore. And therefore we see, okay, this was maybe 1% too much, and we decreased 1% the next lap.
Now, this is different from how a professional driver would approach finding the limit. An amateur driver actually does exactly this. They incrementally increase their pace across the entire lap until they reach the limit. But the problem is, when you then reach the limit, you're already going fast, and when you push over the limit, it's quite a risk. However, a professional driver will actually get on the brakes to a corner a little bit early and ramp up that brake pressure until they start to lock up the tyres. So they're understanding where the limit is straight away on the first corner. They'll then go into the corner and turn the steering wheel a bit harder than they would normally, pushing the car over the limit. So there they're understanding the lateral load. Then they'll get the car in a straight line and begin to get on the power quite hard. They'll make the car wheel spin a little bit and understand how much acceleration the car can take. Rather than creeping up to the limit, they're actually figuring out the limit as quickly as possible. Then they're internalizing the amount of G-force and aggression the car can take, which they'll then apply to the rest of the lap. So it's a much quicker way to find the limit and get up to speed. Now, TUM do have the capability to do this, but they're not developed enough to do it just yet. I actually spoke to Simon about it, and he said it would be a more efficient way to do it, but it is more challenging. So right now, it's too high risk. But in the slower and easier corners, they're actually not far off.
Under braking and in low speed turns we're pretty good, while we are not really as good on the throttle exiting the turn if the car starts slipping more.
What they do have on their side is some control systems that are actually better than what a human driver can do.
What we use to control the car is essentially a throttle input and steering. This is like the human driver does as well, but we have the advantage that we can control all 4 brakes on the wheel on the car individually. So each wheel can be braked individually, and this helps us to do to be especially good under braking and also implement stabilizing algorithms that help us in the corner if something goes wrong.
So while a human driver has one brake pedal controlling all 4 corners, the autonomous system can brake each wheel individually, which means they can do things a human simply can't.
And if we see there is a big difference between the rotational velocity and our own estimated velocity, we can assume the wheel is currently locking up, and we decrease brake pressure on this wheel.
So that's an anti-lock system, but they can also use individual wheel braking to catch the car when it starts to oversteer.
I mean, we can picture the situation again that we are heavily braking coming into a turn, and then we suddenly see, okay, the car starts to oversteer, we are starting to lose the rear, and then our algorithm is not really very well designed for counter steering, but we know, okay, the car is turning more than it should be, therefore we apply brake pressure to the front outside wheel in order to catch it back in and to align it where we want to go.
Now, where a human driver would counter steer and catch a slide with steering input, the autonomous car is catching itself with brake pressure on one wheel. It's a completely different approach, but the human driver has one big advantage: prediction.
I mean, a human commands the steering angle with force, essentially, so you feel you get a lot of feedback from the front tires, and you see what the steering is doing, but we do not get any feedback of the force of the front wheel. We just send a position, and if the car starts rotating more, you usually get, as a human, the feedback that you need less steering torque, and you automatically decrease steering a bit, but this is not an information we have available. We need to somehow estimate from the movement of the car that we now have to steer less.
So a human driver feels the tyres about to lose grip. They're predicting what's coming. whereas the autonomous system only knows what's happening right now, so it's always reacting rather than predicting. Right, so we've seen that these cars can lap quickly, they are fast, they can find the limit, and they've got some clever control systems. But remember that challenge that I mentioned at the start? Well, this is where things get difficult. Multi-car racing. And this is where I believe A2RL are still a long way off humans.
The hardest challenge here with racing
Is what I was thinking, yeah, like fighting the other car is a whole different thing. It seems like the car's already kind of struggling to calculate their own information. So then I can only imagine, like, on top of it, calculating the other cars, right? Because you don't see them like a human, you have to calculate all of them as the AI. Yeah.
RL is the multi-car aspect. Driving a autonomous vehicle around a track singular at high speed, okay, it's not simple, but it's simpler than multi-car. With multi-car, you have to focus on perception. You have to focus on the car's surroundings, the car's environment, and understanding what is happening, as well as trying to go fast. So multi-car racing is by far the most difficult part of this. Overtaking other cars into corners and things, it's very new for these teams.
So the software has to work in 3 stages. Sense where you are and where the other drivers are, plan what to do about it, and then act. Apply the throttle, the brakes, and the steering to execute on that plan. And they're doing all of this with no communication between the cars, just what they can see from their sensors.
We just see the others if we can detect them in our sensor inputs. And if you detect them, you usually also need to track them. So as a human, for example, you know if there is an opponent in front of me and it's behind the next turn, you usually know he is still there. But you need to teach that to an algorithm as well, that if you're not seeing him at the moment, he is probably still there. And if you know where an opponent is, you still need to predict where he's going, because if you don't know how fast he will go or which line he's going to take, it's pretty hard to safely navigate around him, to choose your own braking point or to even choose to overtake him.
And when you're approaching a car that you haven't seen before, you don't know where they're going or where they're braking, so you've got to make multiple predictions and choose the safe option. Now, last year was the first year of A2RL, the first time they put multiple cars on track together, and the teams learned a lot. The hardware needed more redundancy, sensor backups, and they needed to combine traditional motorsport data with autonomous racing data.
So this year we have redundant IMUs, we have redundant GPS antennas, so we don't have dropouts, and if we do have a dropout, we switch to a backup. And teams are now coding their cars to have redundant systems. So for instance, if a camera drops...
Well, I was saying last time, I'm like, even listening to all this, what is very interesting, I'm still not that interested myself to really, I think, if I ever was to watch racing, I would watch real people still. Maybe once I would watch a, like, AI race or something. But, overall, it's not something that I feel like I would watch a lot of. But all of the stuff here sounds pretty interesting if it can be converted into video game in some way. Some of this technology and all that, some of this AI thinking. I can't imagine like a racing game where, the other car can sync to this level. Obviously it would have to be nerfed, otherwise it would beat you. Not in this current version, but in the later version, which will be perfect, I assume. But it would be much more interesting than some of the simpler AI that we might have now.
Out on the car, they will automatically switch to LiDAR as a priority. So teams this year have switched their strategy to perception mode, and it's allowed teams to progress much quicker. And actually the cars are driving much safer at higher speeds than they were last year.
And I have to say, watching them test, seeing them go flat out down the straight and braking late, I genuinely didn't expect them to be as quick as they were on a single lap. However, I didn't see very much multi-car running, so when the race happens, I don't know how they're going to do with multiple cars on track at the same time. What I do know is that the technology is impressive, and they've made real progress from last year. These cars probably still won't race like humans when there's multiple cars on track, but they will get there, and it'll be fascinating.
They'll literally be better than human eventually. Like, kind of like all of the AI technology you know, has gone so fast in just the last couple of years. I mean, by 2030, I won't be surprised if, yeah, like, they already race at a level that human cannot reach, simply because of, you know, 360 view and stuff like that, which again, we can't do, or like controlling every wheel, etc.
To understand the technology behind how they get there. Because the thing is, this isn't about whether a robot can beat a human driver. It's about the engineering challenge and the innovation. And for me, that makes this worth watching. If you want to see more motorsport technology,
At the same time, I would like to see it, like, the best human driver challenging these AI cars again and again and again, and trying to like keep the win for humanity in the same way that I was talking about Deep Blue, right? And so, you know, they were developing this chess computer, and eventually there was a series of match against Garry Kasparov. He was the world champion and one of the greatest grandmaster of all time in chess. And they had like a couple games in the 80s. And at first, you know, it was close, but Garry Kasparov was able to like beat the computer, but eventually he lost to it. And you know, it seemed inevitable, right? Because every time they would have a match, the team would improve it, improve the computer and everything. But again, I think I'd kind of like to see it as this technology advances and gets really good. Eventually try to have some of the best human racers, still try to beat it, still try to like use its AI-ness against it, and try to still like win. I think it could be interesting. I'd watch it. So yeah, definitely a good video to learn more about this. I mean, the race that we saw last time was still very goofy, but understanding the level of stuff that goes into this, yeah, it's gonna take a couple of years, but you know, I feel like by 2030, it's gonna be pretty damn good. And it's another one of those things where like, you know, in the end, I still have to assume that the goal is not to really have some kind of like popular sport of like AI racing. This is all just like a branch of advancing the technology to advance the overall technology of all of this, you know. And I think that's cool, you know. I think that's cool. That's all I can say.